One of the things that's interesting about being a Bears fan is that some questions are easy. Do we want the Bears to win? Of course. Do we want Caleb Williams to become a superstar? Absolutely. Do we want another championship? Without question. But every once in a while, a question comes along that makes Bears fans uncomfortable. A question where there isn't an obvious right answer. A question where your heart says one thing and your head says another. And I think we're staring at one of those questions right now. Because for the first time in a long time, the possibility of the Chicago Bears playing somewhere other than Chicago feels real. And judging by some of the reactions I've seen, a lot of Bears fans have already made up their minds. The answer is no, absolutely not. Not happening. The Chicago Bears belong in Chicago. End of discussion. My name is Kenneth Pierce, and this is Football's Greatest Bears, or FGB. Today, we're talking about the question Bears fans don't want to answer, and my answer may surprise some people. Because I think a lot of Bears fans are focusing on the wrong thing. Now, before anyone starts typing an angry comment, hear me out. I understand the emotional connection to Chicago and the history and Soldier Field and the lakefront and George Hallis. I understand why the idea of the Bears playing across the state line feels wrong to some people. I really do. But here's my question. What exactly changes? Seriously, what actually changes? If the Bears move a few miles across an invisible border, are they suddenly not the Chicago Bears anymore? Do Walter Payton's records disappear? Does the 85 team disappear? Does the history disappear? Do Bears fans stop being Bears fans? Of course not. The team is still the team, the history is still the history, and the fans are still the fans. The traditions are the traditions, the rivalries are the rivalries, the uniforms are the uniforms. The Bears are the Bears. And that's why I've never fully understood the obsession with the state line itself. I am from the southeast side, and Hammond is very familiar to me. Growing up on the southeast side of Chicago, I spent a lot of time in Hammond, and it just feels like an extension of the city. At the end of the day, it's a line on the map, nothing more. And I think Bears fans should be asking a different question. Not where the stadium is, but whether the stadium helps the franchise. Because that's the question that actually matters. You know, one of the things that's always fascinated me about the stadium conversation is how quickly people become emotional about geography. If the Bears moved to Arlington Heights, most fans would celebrate. But Arlington Heights isn't Chicago either. Let's be honest, nobody's confusing Arlington Heights with downtown Chicago. Nobody's taking a picture of Arlington Heights and putting it on a postcard. It's a suburb, and that's fine. But if people are willing to leave Chicago for Arlington Heights, then the conversation really isn't about leaving Chicago. The conversation is about crossing a state line. And I just don't think that's a very compelling argument, especially when you consider where Hammond actually is. We're not talking about moving a team to Indianapolis. We're not talking about moving the team 3 hours away. We're talking about a location that's still part of the greater Chicagoland community where Bears fans already live. It's a place that's connected to Chicago economically, connected culturally, connected geographically, connected through generations of people who live, work, commute, and spend time throughout the region. For a lot of people, myself included, Hammond isn't a distant place. It's practically next door, and that matters. In fact, if I'm being completely honest, I think Hammond might actually be more convenient than Arlington Heights for a lot of Bears fans, especially for those on the south side and for those in Northwest Indiana, and especially for those who already travel through the corridor on a regular basis. That's one of the reasons I never immediately dismiss the idea, because when I look at a map, Hammond does not feel far away. It feels connected. Now, here's where I think the conversation gets even more interesting. Because when people talk about Hammond, they often talk about what the Bears will be giving up. But I don't always think we're talking about what the Bears could gain. And I think that's where this discussion deserves a little bit more attention. Because let's be honest, the Bears have spent years dealing with limitations. Limitations on what they can build, what they control, what they can generate, what they can modernize. The NFL has changed. Stadium economics have changed. Fan expectations have changed. Revenue models have changed. And whether we like it or not, franchises that control their own environments have advantages, significant advantages. More flexibility, more events, more development opportunities, more revenue opportunities. more control over the fan experience. And that's not speculation, that's reality. And if Hammond provides a better path towards those goals, then I think Bears fans should at least be willing to consider it. Not that we actually get a say. Another thing I've noticed is that some people talk about Hammond as if moving there somehow disconnects the Bears from the city. I actually think the opposite could happen. One of the reasons I find Hammond intriguing is that it potentially keeps the Bears connected to the lakefront experience that so many fans care about. That's something that doesn't get discussed enough. Because when people imagine a move, they imagine a complete separation from everything they associate with Chicago. But Hammond doesn't necessarily represent that. In some ways, it could preserve more of the feeling than other alternatives. And I think that's worth considering. Because if you're a Bears fan who loves the idea of the team playing near the lake, why would you automatically dismiss an option that potentially preserves that part of the identity? It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Now let's be clear, I'm not saying Hammond is perfect. Every stadium proposal comes with questions. Every location comes with trade-offs. Every major project comes with risks. And that's true whether we're talking about Chicago, Arlington Heights, or Hammond, or somewhere else. No option is perfect. What I am saying is that too many fans seem to be evaluating Hammond emotionally before they evaluate it practically. And I think that's backwards. The first question should be, is it good for the franchise? The second question should be, is it good for the fans? The third question should be, can it help the Bears compete for decades to come? If the answer to those questions are yes, then I don't think an invisible border should stop the conversation. Because at some point, we have to decide what's actually important. Is it the mailing address or is it the future of the organization? Because those aren't the same thing. You know, one of the funny things about sports is that fans often become attached to things that feel permanent. Stadiums, logos, uniforms, location, and then time passes. Things change. And somehow the team remains. The Soldier Field isn't the same as Soldier Field once was. The Bears of today aren't the Bears of 1985. The NFL isn't the NFL that many of us grew up watching. I'd be curious to know how angry people were when the Bears moved away from Wrigley Field. Change happens. It always has. It always will. The question isn't whether things change. The question is whether those changes make the organization stronger. And when I look at the Hammond possibility, that's the lens I try to use. Not nostalgia, not emotion, not state lines, strength. Does it make the Bears stronger? Does it position the franchise better? Does it help create an environment where the organization can thrive for the next 30 or 40 years? Because if the answer is yes, then I think the Bears fans should be willing to have the conversation. Even if it's uncomfortable, even if it challenges assumptions, even if it forces us to rethink what actually makes the Chicago Bears the Chicago Bears. Because in my opinion, the Chicago Bears are not defined by a zip code. I felt no differently when they played in Champaign-Urbana. They're not defined by a municipal boundary. They're not defined by which side of the state line they play on. They're defined by their history, their fans, their traditions, their culture, their legacy. And none of those things disappear if the stadium ends up a few miles east. In fact, I think there's a strong argument that Hammond gives the Bears an opportunity to maintain something that's always mattered to the franchise. As I said before, the lakefront. That's one thing that gets lost in these conversations. People talk as though the choice is Chicago or not Chicago, but that's really not the choice. The real question is what environment best positions the Bears for the future while preserving as much of their identity as possible. When I look at Hammond, I see an option that deserves a lot more serious consideration than it's getting. Not because it's Indiana, not because it's not in Illinois, but because it may actually solve several problems at once. The Bears get more control, the organization gets more flexibility, the fans stay connected to the region, the team remains on the lakefront, and the franchise gets to build something designed for the future instead of consistently trying to adapt something built for the past. That's why I think this conversation matters, not because of geography, but it's about priorities. And if we're being honest, I think a lot of Bears fans have confused the two. So here's my question for you. If Hammond, Indiana gave the Bears the best stadium and the best long-term future and the best opportunity to compete for championships, would you support it? Or is staying inside Illinois more important to you than any potential benefit? But that's just my opinion. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, subscribe to Football's Greatest Bears, and turn on the notifications so you don't miss future episodes. Thank you for spending part of your day with me. Bear down and FGB.